Welcome back, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, to another brand new If I Had Written episode. If I Had Written, the Sinister Six spin-off movie. Now, a lot of people really wanted me to do this after I did the If I Had Written the Amazing Spider-Man 3. And I felt more so obligated to do this, and I just really wanted to do it because I felt that there were so many pieces that I could put together before The Amazing Spider-Man 4, where this story just dives deep into it with all these brand new characters, and I really wanted to make it new and refreshing for a lot of people and doing a lot of different concepts that I don't think anyone's ever done before, doing a Sinister Six fan fiction. And so that being said, I do want to say, do make sure to check out the latest episode, If I Had Written the Amazing Spider-Man 3, because if you haven't already, you're not going to really know what's going on. And I would do that for a lot of the If I Had Written the Amazing Spider-Man series, as well as the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 4 through 7 so far. That being said, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, let's dive into another episode, If I Had Written the Sinister Six spin-off movie. The jets cooled as Vulture landed on top of the building. The lights were out thanks to Electro. Vulture was able to cut his way in and make it inside. A laboratory was nearby, and it was marked with a caution hazardous sign out front. Vulture snorted and kicked it down. Electro was behind him, his fingertips sparkling with blue light. Rhino was in the lobby, causing a distraction, and Sandman was waiting outside, in case they needed backup or another distraction. Sandman was pretty good at creating those. Vulture would give him that. "You think it's in here?" Electro asked as he leaned against the doorway. Vulture peeked his head inside and saw steam radiating off of the chemical vats. He chuckled and tilted his head back and forth. "Oh yeah, it's in here." Vulture entered, and Electro guarded the door. Even from all the way on the top floor, Vulture felt like he could hear the screams of Rhino's victims. Or, at the very least, he could feel the way the building shook each time Rhino took a step. Vulture didn't know if he trusted Rhino or not, but at least he was big, shiny, and hard to put down. He didn't trust Rhino, but he trusted that anywhere Rhino was, the police would shoot at him, not Vulture. The inside of the lab seemed barren, like it had been cleaned out in anticipation for an invasion. Vulture cursed under his breath, and noticed how even the vats seemed drained. The monitors showed the entire room had little to no chemicals present. The rest of the room was drained of life. Then where was it? Did they waste their time? "What's taking so long?" Electro called from the doorway. "Hurry up, man. We don't got all day. I can't find it." "Did you try looking under the vats?" "Oh gee, why didn't I think of that?" Vulture asked, with a sign. Despite his words, he did. In fact, kneel so he could get a better view of the floor. Although he had a general idea of what it looked like, he didn't know if it could hide between the floorboards. It could be hidden anywhere. "We don't have enough time for this. Electro, Rhino can only stall for so long before that spider thing shows up," Electro said. Annoyed with the constant interruptions, Vulture stormed over and dragged Electro inside. "If you think it's so easy, why don't you search it for yourself?" Electro did as he was told. He brought the lights to life, since the rest were out, but that didn't help. Still, there was no proof that what they were looking for was inside in the vicinity. There weren't even any signs that it was ever in the building to begin with. "Goblin's gonna kill us," Electro said. "He's been cooped up in that lab waiting for us to bring it to him." "Correction, he'll kill you." "You think I'm gonna be the one to tell him?" Vulture asked. "You never told him. Rhino did it the first time, Sandman the second, me the third. You want me to do it again?" Vulture grinned behind his mask. "Yes." Electro pushed by Vulture and went back to the door, but they were interrupted by a loud bang that filled the air. A few seconds of silence passed. Then, another bang. They became more consistent. They were like footsteps, only much heavier, like they belonged to a monster. And Vulture and Electro were the prey. Electro shut off the lights and hid in the back wall, while Vulture prepared to attack from the shadows. He never got the chance to. A male figure stood in the doorway, with what looked like to be tentacles hanging off of him from his body. There were 4 of them, and they seemed to be the source of the banging sound. The figure stepped in by prying the walls back. The metal arms he had were strong enough to pull the walls back. Vulture didn't know if he was terrified or impressed. The stranger stopped in the middle of the room. Although the lights were out, Vulture felt as though he could see the man clearly. That's why Vulture felt a bitter unease swirl up inside of him when he saw the man smile before speaking. "Hello, gentlemen? How can I help you this evening?" Peter laughed. After what felt like a lifetime of torment, he had a grin on his face that crinkled his eyes until he could barely see. His spider sense took a back seat in favor of letting Peter live in the moment. The smell of pasta was in the air. There were waiters rushing around with bottles of wine, and a classic song was blasting on the speakers. Parker sat at the wooden table with a candle at the centerpiece. There were white roses decorating the base of it. Peter wiped his clammy hands on the end of the white tablecloth before the redhead across from him could see. "Now, since I made you laugh," MJ said as she leaned back, the chair creaked, and thanks to Peter's senses, he could hear it over the music. He wondered if it was a gift or a curse. "Maybe it's time I ask what you do for work." She had a glass of red wine in her hands. A black dress hugged her body and suited her dark red locks. Her hair shaped her face and showed off her sharp cheekbones. She had a gorgeous smile that had Peter hooked. "I work at the Bugle, editorial and photography. I'm surprised they have you doing both. You know about the photography world?" "I'd hope so," she replied with a chuckle. She paused to take a sip of her beverage. "I'm a model, an actress. I'm used to being around cameras." "Why am I not surprised you're a model? You're bolder than I thought. And here I thought you were a nerd." "What about my face? Makes me look like a nerd?" Peter asked. He laughed again. It was nice to feel like someone was interested in knowing about him. It felt nice to know he was putting in as much effort as he received. Although it had only been 20 minutes, Mary Jane and him hit it off. She cut right to the point with the texts. There was no talking stage where they played 21 questions. Instead, MJ said, "Dinner, when and where?" And that was that. Maybe her boldness was rubbing off on him. "You just said you're a photographer. Seems a bit nerdy to me," she said. But based on her tone, he could tell she was just pushing his buttons. That was something he appreciated about her. Throughout the short time he had known her, she had been trying to make him laugh. "Must I remind you that you know a lot about cameras too?" Peter asked. She smirked. "Touchy, Parker. Glad to know you're paying attention. Who wouldn't pay attention to a beauty like you?" "That was cute." "I threw up a little in my mouth, but it was cute," she said, which caused both of them to laugh. And that's how the entire date went. They laughed and shared parts of their life that made them who they were. Peter avoided anything that would link him to Spider-Man for obvious reasons, and he was surprised to see how much of his life really was about Spider-Man. He didn't have much to talk about other than work and Aunt May. His interest in science and technology was great, but it didn't make for much of a conversation starter. Luckily, MJ sensed his growing awkwardness and helped him through it. It was nice that he could bounce off of someone. It felt like they had a fantastic dynamic already. By the time it was over, Peter offered to walk her home. MJ had a thing against subways, and Peter couldn't blame her. He normally swung home to avoid it. The few times he didn't take the subway, It ended poorly. There were always too many people and too many smells. There were screens all around them as well as billboards lit up and showed advertisements for some random brands Peter would never buy. MJ seemed entranced by them. She admired every little detail, and he found himself smiling as he observed her. "I know it's a little silly," she said in a small tone, but for the first time since they met, MJ hung her head and avoided eye contact. "There's something about being in the city that excites me. All the buildings and the lights, even the people, it's exciting. It feels like a dream, other than the subway, of course." He tilted her chin up with his free hand, making their eyes lock. "Now, why would you think that's silly?" MJ laughed and tucked a strand of her red hair behind her ears. She had a grin on her face as she turned away to keep admiring the city. Most people say it's weird or foolish to look at the city as anything other than a terrible place, with equally terrible people. The cars honk louder than the sound barrier. The people are either going to yell at you for being slow or ignore you altogether. There's crime everywhere, but I don't know. I want to like it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Peter felt a sense of pride for his city too. Although it was far from the best, it had its charms. It had its best, beautiful parts. At the end of the day, it was his duty to protect it. And Mary Jane was part of the city. It was his duty to protect her. "Thank you," she replied, with a sheepish smile. He squeezed her hand and continued down the sidewalk. That was when one of the billboards turned to the news broadcast. It had breaking news on the bottom, and Peter stopped on instinct. He almost ran into someone because of it. MJ halted in her tracks and shifted to see what the emergency was. The headline said, "Intruders in Octavius Industries." Peter's heart fell to his stomach when he saw that. Then, there were pictures of a man causing havoc inside the lobby of the Industries. There was footage of a different man flying to the top of the lab and cutting his way in. Peter felt his throat go dry and his tongue swell up. If the symbiote was in Octavius Industries, what else was there? What did those intruders want? And why were they so powerful? "Wow," MJ said. Her eyes were wide as she took in the footage. Why would anyone do that? "I hope Spider-Man doesn't try to go up against them. They look tough even for him." Peter didn't reply. His throat was dry too, to form coherent words. Although it seemed as though there was nothing he could do, even if he got into the spider suit right at that moment. He wanted to help. The police were investigating, and Peter wanted to take part of that. Not that they'd let him in. They tolerated him, but many of the officers saw him like a lawless vigilante who was out of line. Peter couldn't say he blamed them. "Let's get you back. Looks like it's dangerous tonight," Peter finally managed to say, and MJ eagerly agreed. However, he couldn't enjoy the last part of his date. Despite how warm and caring Mary Jane was, he had his mind on one thing: the intruders. There were reports of similar heists not long ago, but they were smaller, more contained. This was the first big heist this group had performed. Why were they attacking now? And why did Peter feel like it had something to do with the symbiote? Goblin pressed his hand against the photo. It was a high-quality photo of the black Spider-Man suit. It had the most intriguing design. Upon taking one glance, Goblin knew it wasn't fabric or an updated style. Something had infected it. They were searching for what that was. That led them to performing multiple heists throughout the city to find it. Each time had been a bust, including the most recent one at Octavius Industries. However, at least that one had promise. That heist did give them something, or more like someone. Doctor Octopus. They were missing a face for the operation. Goblin had his strength, but he knew Otto would make a better leader. It hurt Goblin's pride to admit that. Still, Otto and Goblin had the brains, while the rest of the team carried out the plans Otto made. They were searching for the symbiote, and Otto knew of its location. Otto didn't have the exact area, but he knew the black symbiote suit wasn't Spider-Man changing it up. The symbiote had infected him. If that wasn't enough, there was security camera footage of Spider-Man breaking in and stealing the symbiote from the laboratory. That meant they had a lead, Spider-Man. Goblin was in his lab, toying around with the machinery he planned to use to contain the symbiote and study it. Otto told him all he knew about it, and Goblin didn't trust him. He thought Otto would try to take the symbiote for himself, but Goblin liked their odds. Otto had 4 arms while they had Electro. One spark and it was all over for Ock. Or, at least, Goblin hoped that would be the case. "You're brooding," a male voice said, from behind Goblin. "And you're intruding," Goblin paused and chuckled. Rhymes. Such funny things. Goblin turned to face the newest member of the team, Doctor Octopus. "Is there a problem? You've been obsessing over that picture for hours," Otto said, pointing to the cameras in the top corner of the room. "I've watched you the whole time." "How charming." Goblin moved the picture to the side and placed all his gadgets on the table. Otto came over and peered at the work from over his shoulder. "Remarkable," Otto whispered as he shuffled the tech around. Goblin almost smacked him for it, and Otto chuckled. "I'm going to help you find the symbiote. Maybe you should be a bit nicer to me. Scientists can't be trusted. I would know." Sure, Otto replied with a dismissive hand wave. "You want to upgrade your tech? I want my property back. Rhino wants to bang things together. Whatever. We all have our motivations, but the end goal is the same. The symbiote," Goblin finished, and Otto nodded. "As long as I can get the symbiote back, after you're done poking and prodding at it, I don't care what you do. I don't care what any of you do. You should. We're a team. A team without a leader is a bad idea. That happened to share a plan. You're disorganized, but effective. At doing what? Causing chaos or finding the symbiote. Last I checked, you don't have it," Otto said, with a tongue click. "If you hate us so much, why bother helping us?" "Hate you? No, I don't hate you. Don't use strong words. I want the symbiote back. You have the resources to help me get it. I call it a symbiotic relationship." Goblin rolled his eyes. Nice pun. Otto snorted and backed away, his mechanical arms clanking. "When Spider-Man comes back, we'll find it. He won't be ready for us. Don't underestimate him. I'm not. I have faith in this team," Otto said before lowering himself so they could be eye level. "Unless I am overestimating you." Goblin set his jaw. "We have the same end goal, yes? Correct." Goblin grabbed the picture and didn't care that he caused it to wrinkle. He almost slammed it on the table in front of him and pointed to the way the black suit. Spider-Man looked more powerful than any other iteration of the man. Goblin let out a ferocious cackle as he parted his lips to answer, and Spider-Man doesn't stand a chance. Peter buried his eyes in his hands. After seeing the full broadcast, he determined the new group, the Sinister Six, was after the symbiote. Peter hadn't seen where it went. That was irresponsible of him. He had been so desperate to part it from his life that he hadn't waited to see where it went. Peter didn't know what to think. There were a million thoughts storming through his mind at the thought of more villains searching for the symbiote like that. They didn't understand what it was or what it could do. Peter wished he could warn them, but he knew if he tried, he'd either get attacked or laughed at. If anything, his warnings would only entice them more. "Parker," a male voice, caused Peter to snap up. He was in the Bugle's office, with his desk covered in paperwork, newspapers that had to be proofread, and photos that had no home. The voice belonged to Jameson, who approached with a frown on his face. Parker swore he always had a frown. After all, Jameson had more frown lines than wrinkles on his forehead. A smile might kill the man. Peter didn't know if he should laugh or cry at the idea of Jameson dropping dead after grinning. Part of Peter was intrigued while the other part was horrified. "Yes, sir," Peter asked as Jameson rested a hand on his desk. "I need more shots of Spider-Man. There are rumors he's using his old suit again." We need to be the first to showcase it. Oh geez, let me just call him real quick and ask if he can pose for me. Parker, Jameson said in a snappy tone that had Peter deflating. Will you get the pictures or not? I'll do my best, Peter answered, sinking back in his chair. Jameson left without acknowledging Peter's response. Peter glanced over and saw Eddie's desk was still empty. He hadn't been there for a couple of days. Peter didn't bother asking his co-workers if they knew why. Maybe Eddie was avoiding Peter. Peter wouldn't blame him. However, Peter planned to apologize as soon as he came back. Peter's bullying got to the point where other co-workers joined in and started picking on poor Eddie. Not too long after Peter rid himself of the symbiote, he managed to get his co-workers to back off. Unfortunately, none of that mattered if Eddie thought he was going to get chewed on and spat out at the place he was supposed to make money. Although it saddened Peter's heart to know he didn't have the chance to make it right yet, at least there was one positive. Peter didn't have to see those hideous checkered shirts for a little bit longer. Parker got back to work, despite his raging mind. For Peter, the shift went by in a matter of minutes, but in reality, it had been hours. Jameson instructed him to go home, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. After getting his bag and leaving the Bugle, he took a walk throughout the city. There were people rushing to get to their next destination. Most of them had headphones, so they didn't get bothered by anyone promoting their music or trying to scam others. Peter got bothered a few times, but he had lived in the city for long enough. He learned how to ignore it. Every sidewalk had life. Even the ones that seemed more discreet had people laughing and chattering with one another. Peter was the odd man out. He didn't have headphones, he didn't have friends to chat with, and he didn't have a destination. He was alone. Part of him considered calling Mary Jane and asking about her day, but he decided against it. The two had been texting back and forth here and there since their first date. Otherwise, they hadn't done anything. Peter was going to ask her on another date soon. She took the initiative the first time. Now it was his turn. However, he wasn't ready yet. His mind was still on Gwen. Not because he didn't want to get over her, but because of the symbiote. His unease grew more and more every day. But what if those intruders he saw in the broadcast were after him? He had the symbiote before. What if the intruders were retracting Peter's steps? He didn't know how to feel about any of it. So, he sat in front of one of the many apartment complexes and kicked at the pavement. His poor shoes got beat up from the action, but he didn't care. It took his mind off the pain of having to confront himself. As much as he rid himself of the symbiote, he couldn't rid himself of the ugly disease that was guilt. No matter how much he went through, there was no stopping it. It would always be creeping around the corner, ready to lunge on him like a predator. Gwen's death didn't hurt him the same way it used to. Before, it filled him with a solitude he couldn't get past. Now, it filled him with the guilt that MJ would end up in the same way. And it was all because of his feelings toward the symbiote. At the very least, the city had started to remind him of Mary Jane. Her eyes shined when she had looked around on the first date. He focused on that, and he found himself feeling better, like he was healing. For a moment, one blissful moment, he felt the pressure lifted from his shoulders. He felt nothing but warmth. Then, the guilt came washing back over his lungs, until he felt like he was drowning. There were no leads. It wasn't like Peter could track down the symbiote. Octavius Industries was the only place that could possibly have a lead, since they owned the symbiote. Otherwise, it was nothing more than an inaudible whisper in the wind. The powerless made Peter feel vile. He wished he could puke it out. He didn't have anything to shove it out of his body, and Peter decided to stare up at the stars and try to find constellations. Not that he knew of any. There was nothing there that gave him an answer as what to do. However, in the darkness, he could make out what seemed to be a checkered pattern. He groaned. Why did those stupid patterns follow him everywhere? Despite that, his mind thought of Eddie Brock, and wondered if he was okay. If something bad happened to Eddie because of Peter, he'd never forgive himself. The subway was lonely tonight. Eddie had his hands in his pockets. He had been searching for Spider-Man everywhere. The easy solution would be to confront Peter after work, but Eddie didn't want to do that. He didn't want to give Peter the chance to observe Eddie and sense something was wrong with him. He needed to catch the Spider Thing off guard. Fortunately, Spider-Man had fans. Anything he did, the public posted about or cheered about, or a mix of both. Eddie followed multiple Instagram and Twitter accounts who were borderline stalking Spider-Man. They followed his every move and even made theories about his identity. They found some hidden backpacks around the city with male clothes inside. Those bags seemed like they belonged to Spider-Man, seeing as they were backup web shooters inside. However, Spider-Man was smart enough to make sure his fingerprints weren't on any of the objects. Beyond that, there were no identifying objects, just plain clothes and web shooters, occasionally a water bottle. Eddie was honed to be one of the only ones who knew the identity of Spider-Man. He didn't know if anyone else knew. Of course, surely Peter's family knew. After minimal research, Eddie found out Peter had an Aunt May. He considered kidnapping her to draw Peter out of hiding. Deep down, Eddie knew Peter hadn't shown up as Spider-Man because he was creating a better, improved suit. Not that it would matter. He wouldn't stand a chance against Eddie and the symbiote. Tonight was the night Eddie would find Peter. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. The one thing Eddie knew about Peter was his address. After sneaking into the Bugle and searching through the employee records, Eddie found it. That was where he was heading, Peter Parker's apartment. The train flew by and slowed to a stop. Despite the emptiness of the station, the inside of the subway was packed to the point where people were pressed up against each other. Eddie entered when one person departed. He took the woman's space inside, and he regretted it almost immediately. It smelled of sweat. It didn't help that he got sandwiched between two much larger men, who had beards longer than their necks. Eddie could feel the hairs tingling the back of his head, and he shuddered from the sensation. The 10-minute ride was torture. Even though there were multiple stops along the way, neither of the men suffocating Eddie moved to get off. When it was Eddie's stop, he practically pushed his way out of there. With his eyes narrowed and his hands curled up into fists, Eddie departed the subway station and traveled and traversed the familiar sidewalks. He had been all around the city thanks to photo shoots and writing. Although he wasn't the most impressive photographer at the Bugle, he prided himself on his work. The work that got discredited by Peter Parker. Eddie had to ruin something of Peter's in return. Whether it be a relationship, a prized possession, or his image, Eddie would ruin it. Preferably, he'd like to expose Spider-Man's identity to the public. That would be the ultimate conundrum for poor little Spider-Man. Eddie pulled on his checkered shirt to attempt to calm himself down, but the emotions swelled up inside of him. As he came closer to the apartment complex, the exterior looked run down, like it needed a bath. It smelled of old mold and expired milk as he entered and saw the lobby, looking no better than the outside. Even the fake plants were dead. The staircase was in the back, waiting for him. The door was creaking since it wasn't fully shut. There were no people around. If there were cameras, Eddie didn't see them. Although considering the state of the building, he doubted the footage would be good enough to make out faces. Eddie stood there, in the abandoned lobby, staring across the way at the stairs that would lead him to Peter Parker. The hatred burned inside of him until he could feel the darkness oozing on his fingers. He had a few seconds at most before he let the symbiote cover him. That meant he had to go. He had to go confront Parker. And that was exactly what he did. "I didn't know you cook," MJ said, Peter winced as he checked the chicken. "Oh, don't be so sure about that. We should have just ordered pizza." She laughed and gave his shoulder a nudge. "Here, let me see what you did." He agreed, and Peter didn't want to be anywhere near the stove, but he thought it'd be a wonderful idea to invite MJ over for their second date. Sure, it was moving a little fast. The first date went over well, and he wanted to do something to impress her. He thought he could impress her with his cooking skills. He only embarrassed himself. "You did fine. It just needed to be a little longer. It'll turn out perfectly cooked," MJ explained. Peter pretended to know what she was saying, and when she saw his small nod, she signed. "Chicken not done. I cook chicken longer. Chicken done now." "Oh, thanks." She snickered and finished off their meal. Together they decorated the plates and got drinks. Peter made sure to get a special bottle of wine for the occasion. It costed him almost a month of his salary. MJ did the honors of popping the bottle open and pouring them their glasses. Next, they sat at the kitchen table. There was a little cramped due to the small size of Peter's apartment. Still, they made it work. MJ made sure the table was clear, while Peter put the dirty dishes in the sink. Finally, they got to eat and laugh and talk. Felt like the other night when he took her out for dinner. It was more like her taking him out to dinner. She insisted on paying since she had been the one so forward about going out. He convinced her to split the bill so he didn't feel bad, but she ended up pouting at him and making him change his mind. Not again. He wanted to spoil her, despite how little his job paid. "I think my boss hates me," Peter said, which caused MJ to slow her knife down. She glanced up, and he loved that. He loved how she slowed down her movements, so she could focus on the conversation. It was the little things that mattered. "He always gives me the most assignments. Maybe you're the best." "At what? Sitting behind a desk and typing?" MJ shrugged. "Maybe it's harder than it sounds. I appreciate the effort, but we both know it's not that hard to proofread." "It can, depending on who wrote it," MJ replied with a chuckle, and Peter returned. If nothing else, at least she had a way of making things feel light and fun. They were about halfway through their dinner when Peter realized that they had fallen so deep down the rabbit hole of jobs. They hadn't talked about anything else. MJ spoke about her recent projects and how she hadn't seen the most success, but it was better than nothing. Peter talked about how he couldn't stand his boss, the normal work things. However, that changed when Peter went to take one more bite of his chicken. The fork stayed in the air, never connecting to the delicious meat. MJ noticed and tried to ask what was wrong, but her voice was distant. His senses were ringing. He could feel something. No, someone nearby. Goosebumps formed on his arms and neck. His fingers got clammy and caused sweat to hit the innocent fork. He dropped it and got up without answering the confused Mary Jane. On instinct, he went to his room and closed the door behind him. His web shooters were there. Without thinking, he grabbed them and put them in his back pockets. Before returning to Mary Jane, he couldn't identify where the senses were coming from. He didn't know what was happening. It came to him all of a sudden, and he didn't know what to feel. The sense was overpowering. It clogged his nostrils with the copper scent of dread. The taste of chicken on his tongue faded in the favor of fear, and it swirled around his mouth until he could find out what was about to happen. Before he could react, the door snapped down. It got blown off the hinges, and a mass of darkness came inside the room. It seemed organic. The creature had sharp teeth and a long tongue that oozed with green saliva. The liquid dripped down and covered Peter's carpets. Not caring if MJ would be freaked out, Peter latched the web shooters to his wrists and jumped on the counter, firing a web at the intruder. The beast got hit with the web, but it seemed unaffected. It flickered the web off and pounced. Peter jumped and grabbed Mary Jane in the process, diving out of the way of the creature's attack. The thing growled and snarled. It seemed like it had veins and blood, only that they were black. The beast was much taller than Peter and had a wide frame. It seemed like something out of a horror movie, but the more Peter stared at it, the more Peter recognized the symbiote. Peter put MJ aside and faced the intruder. He jumped and ducked and dove to the ground, but nothing worked. The creature got the upper hand without breaking a sweat. It knocked Peter around and shoved him against the wall until a dent formed. Peter gagged and tried punching, but nothing worked. The beast was too powerful. The beast grabbed the web shooters and broke them, leaving Parker on his own. He kicked himself off and landed, grabbing the kitchen table and throwing it at the beast. It smashed off its head. That made it stumble, but it didn't fall. There was a window on the left side. The creature was standing near it, and if Peter could angle it correctly, he could get it to fall out. "Who are you?" Peter asked. He grabbed one of the broken table legs and held it up. The creature licked its sharp teeth.
"Venom,"
it replied, in a deep, raspy tone. It charged again, and Peter jumped up to attach himself to the ceiling. He did a flip to get to the counter, and he shoved the table leg in its mouth, right as it went to attack. Venom staggered back and chewed through the wood, but before it could attack again, it howled out in pain. MJ had stabbed it with one of the sharp legs that had broken off. There were 2 more legs, and she had both of them. She tossed one to Peter, who caught it and leaped. He almost stabbed Venom, but the creature hopped back, kicked Peter away, and jumped out of the window to retreat. Peter panted from the attack. He was amazed Venom retreated, but when he thought about, he realized the symbiote hadn't shown itself since it parted from Peter. That could have been its first battle. It was scared, and Peter didn't know how to feel about that. When he got past its fears, it would be unstoppable. It could have killed Peter right then and there. MJ trailed off as she scanned over Peter's exhausted appearance. He had blood on his body from all of the hits he had endured, and that was without going into the sweat on his forehead and the tears in his eyes from the agony swelling through his veins. "Yep, I'm Spider-Man. Surprise," he said with a forced smile. He ran a hand through his hair. "Well, I was hoping we could have saved this conversation for a third date." "Yeah, I can see why now." MJ didn't finish her thoughts. She glanced at the mess that had become Peter's apartment. He grabbed his destroyed web shooters and signed. That meant he had to make more, and he didn't have time for that. He already had been taking a break for long enough. He had been trying to perfect the suit, but now he'd have to scour the city for his backpacks and find the web shooters he had hidden in case of an emergency. He didn't have time to make more. The people needed him, and now MJ needed him too. Peter made a mental deal with himself to get out as Spider-Man tomorrow, no matter what. We can talk about this later, but the police will be here any minute. "You think no one saw a giant creature jump out of your window?" MJ asked. "I'll hide these and everything else that shows that I'm Spider-Man," Peter replied. He rushed to his room so he could hide the evidence. Although he was sure that the police wouldn't search his room, since it had nothing to do with the scene of the crime, still, Peter hid what he could. He made the spider suit blend in with his other clothes, and the web shooters got shoved in the pocket of one of his unused pair of jeans. When he came back out, MJ had already sat on the couch that got torn from the encounter. It was the only piece of furniture that didn't get overturned during the fight. "MJ," Peter stared, but she held up her hand. "Let's get through the integration and sleep on it. It's been a very eventful second date." Peter signed and agreed, and he cautiously sat next to her, and she allowed it. She didn't freak out or scream or cry. If anything, she seemed calmer than Peter. Peter sank back in the cushions and waited. The symbiote was back, and he didn't know how to stop it. Peter didn't know what to think. Only 2 days after Venom attacked him and crashed his date, Peter felt empty. MJ found out his identity, but hadn't shunned him out for it. In fact, they had barely spoken about it. They hadn't gotten on a third date yet, as to avoid an awkwardness or tension. Beyond that, Peter wanted Venom gone before he went out with her again. It was a double-edged sword. Either stay with Mary Jane and keep an eye on her, or leave her be and hope Venom doesn't find her. Both options sucked. However, it seemed as though Peter didn't have much to say in the matter, seeing as there was a knock on his door. When he opened it, MJ revealed herself. Peter didn't feel safe in his apartment. but he felt even less safe when MJ was there. The danger levels rose whenever she was around him. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone would be taken away. He hated himself for it. But her being in front of him made him see Gwen instead of MJ. The image haunted him, until his visions dulled and his heartbeat sped up. "What are you doing here?" he asked. She had a sad smile on her face. "You know we need to talk. Why not over text?" "You deserve to hear it in person, not over a screen," she said. Although his heart hurt at the thought of putting her in danger, he knew sending her home would only be worse. So she entered, and he shut and locked the door behind her, for extra precaution. He dragged a chair over and propped it up against the knob. He knew it only made no difference, but it was a false sense of security that eased his adrenaline. "Sit," she said, as she took her place at the kitchen table. He folded his hands together on the wood and avoided making eye contact. She didn't speak for several moments, but when he didn't hear any noises, he glanced up. When he met her gaze, she opened her mouth. "I don't care that you're Spider-Man." "Well, wait. I could have worded that better. I do care, but I don't care about the danger it brings." "You should. You're right. I should. But I don't need to have been with you for like years to know you're a good guy that I genuinely like. I feel a connection with you, and I know you feel it with me too. It may be foolish to date someone who has a contrast target on his back, but I think it'd be even more foolish to leave someone who I click with. There aren't many people I've met where that has ever happened. I want to fight for it. Do you?" "Of course I do, but it isn't a good idea, especially so early into our relationship," he said cautiously. She smiled. This time, there was no sadness in her eyes. "That's what I want with you, Peter. A relationship. Even though our second date got rudely interrupted, you protected me. It's my turn to protect you." "From what?" he asked in a mutter that felt like it broke his tongue as it passed. She reached across the table and took his hand. His eyes bulged. "MJ, one look at you and I know you're battling yourself. You have demons I don't know about, but I want to learn. Teach me everything there is to know about you. You have a big heart, Peter. You help people every day. With great power comes great responsibility," Peter replied. As if on an instinct, he fought back tears, and MJ softened at that. "You're right. You have so much responsibility, and you say you help so many. The only person you don't help is yourself. If you'll let me, I'd love to have that privilege of being in your life." It was a terrible idea. Bringing her in was exposing her to all the darkest parts of himself. Every failure would be revealed, including Gwen. That was the one thing that terrified him the most. The symbiote was at large, and it was because of him. It was his irresponsibility that caused it to escape. If anything happened to MJ because of it, it was his fault. Yet, looking into her eyes, he couldn't bring himself to say no. "I'd like that," he said with a snort, with a short nod and a sniffle. She laughed. "That's a smart decision." "Oh yeah? Why?" he asked. She gave his hand a squeeze at her smile, as her smile came back and crinkled her eyes. "Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot." The Sinister Six made their way to the bank. It was the best place to test their theory, or more like Goblin's theory. 2 days ago, a news broadcast talked about the arrival of a different Spider-Man-like creature. Doc Ock figured out that the symbiote was attached to someone else who wasn't Spider-Man. Goblin figured out the rest when the news report said that the creature came out of Peter Parker's apartment. The symbiote didn't attack the apartment randomly. It was looking for Spider-Man. If they got Spider-Man to come to them, the odds were that the thing wasn't far behind. They got several gasps and panic screams as they went. They didn't care about who saw them. If anything, they wanted the people to see them and panic. Spider-Man had just gone out and hit the streets again yesterday, which meant he was likely back in action. Spider-Man would be put in a terrible position. Either he came to the bank and walked into a trap, or he would have multiple police officers die. Both options were equally horrifying. But Goblin knew Peter's big heart. would choose to save the police. "You're sure this will work?" Sandman asked. "Even if it doesn't, we don't lose anything. It's not like the police can stop us now. They can't stop one of us, let alone 6 of us," Goblin said with a cackle. Otto rolled his eyes and led them to the bank. They entered thanks to Otto knocking the doors down. Rhino stormed in with his new suit and caused a bigger scene than needed, but at least that gave Goblin peace of mind. No matter what, police would be there. It would be on the news in a matter of minutes. Rhino trashed the place while Goblin threw his glider down and got on it. He hovered over the place for a bird's eye view. Sandman turned himself into a storm, circled the area. Vulture joined Goblin in the sky, and Electro made the lights flicker just to panic the people more. Otto was the face of the operation. He went up to the tellers and spoke with them. They weren't planning to actually rob the place, but they needed publicity. They had to pretend that they were robbing it, so be it. Goblin would gladly partake in it, if it meant that they got the symbiote. The people were unshred out by Otto, and as soon as they were gone, Sandman finished his assault on the air and became whole again. He helped Otto open the vault near the back of the area. They raided ATMs and broke computers. They amped it up as much as they could. "If your plan doesn't work, what do we do then?" Vulture asked. There were 2 who were hanging out in the air, not assisting in the robbery. Goblin shrugged the question off and kept his eyes on the door. "As soon as the thing gets word that Spider-Man is here, he'll come running. It fell out of an apartment building. Do you really think it's the smartest thing in the world?" Vulture snorted. "Good point." He paused. "Wait a minute. Am I getting paid for this? Go help yourself. I'll keep watch." Vulture happily agreed and zoomed to go help the others get rich. Otto didn't care much for the financial benefits of this mission. Otto came back over and stayed under Goblin, waiting for Spider-Man to show up. However, the police arrived first. The sirens blared in the distance until they saw the colors flashing inside the bank. The red and blue flickered like the lights Electro was messing with. Rhino roared a victory cry and ran out to go deal with the police. Goblin waited to scold him and tell him to get back inside, but he didn't care enough. Rhino left the building and attacked the police. Goblin didn't get the best view, but he could hear all the chaos and destruction. The police were screaming, and gunshots fired off every few seconds. "The symbiote is invaluable," Goblin said, choosing to ignore the outdoor battle. "If we get our hands on it, we'd be unstoppable. It's the most incredible, significant breakthrough in years." "Yes," Otto replied, drawing out the S sound for a little longer than needed. "We can change the world." Goblin agreed and watched as Rhino stormed back inside while banging his fists together. He cheered for all the policemen he had just slaughtered. Goblin didn't care enough to join in on the celebrating. Neither did the rest of the 6. Countless minutes ticked by. Despite Electro and Vulture getting irritated, Goblin had faith in his plan. Rhino didn't care. Otto seemed too calm for the comfort, and Sandman didn't say a word about any of it. If he had feelings, Goblin didn't know them. Not that he cared to know them anyways. 2 more minutes slipped away. Goblin lowered himself to the ground, since his legs were getting tired of just hovering in the air. Right when he reached the ground, he could hear it. A wicked smile stretched across his face as he heard the swinging. Then, the red and blue came into his vision. That time, it wasn't the police coming to attempt to arrest them. Goblin recognized that suit anywhere, and a vicious laugh passed his throat when he saw who stood before them. Spider-Man. Peter didn't know what to think. It was obvious they weren't robbing a bank for the sake of robbing a bank. It didn't line up with the rest of their heists. What were they trying to do? The police stood no chance against them, so Peter was backed into a corner. If he did nothing, countless innocent policemen would die. If he did something, he walked into a trap and potentially made life worse. There wasn't no good options, but he went with the one that didn't have death guaranteed. In his spider suit, he swung to the bank that was being assaulted by the group. When he got there, his stomach felt ill. The policemen had been massacred. Peter didn't know by who, and part of him didn't want to know. However, as he landed to enter the bank, he realized he was about to find out. When he went inside, he saw there were 6 people inside. He didn't focus on any of them, except the green Goblin across from him, who had just hopped on his glider and laughed. "Spider-Man joins us at last," the man said, motioning to his companions. "Gather round, my friends. Looks like it worked after all. What do you want?" Peter asked, trying to cut to the chase. The Goblin only laughed more. "We don't want to kill you. We just want you to bring us our new friend." "New friend? What are you talking about?" So it was a trap. On the bright side, Goblin didn't want to kill Spider-Man. Did Spider-Man believe him? Absolutely not. Was it the only thing keeping his sanity intact? Yes. You'll see soon. Care to join us? Based on how beat up your suit is, you could use some more cash, Goblin said, laughing afterwards. The other members of the 6 didn't bother joining in on the Goblin's laughter. Peter didn't know if he should attack or wait, but he wasn't stupid. He knew attacking all 6 of them would be a death sentence. At best, he could take on 3, and that was assuming he could even take on 2 at the same time. They all had different abilities, and Spider-Man had to adapt to it. At the end of the day, he was still healing from his encounter with Venom. Peter's eyes widened behind the mask. The realization hit him, just as his spider sense flared right up. Right as Peter turned around, Venom came charging in the building with a snarl. Green saliva dripped out of his mouth as he painted, flashing his claws. "Excellent. Thank you, Peter," Goblin said. Just like that, the six paid attention. Rhino charged at Venom and prepared to smash into him, but Venom had other plans. He jumped up and used his sharp claws to pierce Rhino's armor. The machinery sparked and died as it fell away from him. Venom knocked Rhino over, crushing him. Goblin hissed and flew down to throw pumpkin bombs at Venom. None of it worked. One by one, the 6 tricked in and joined in on the fight. Peter wasn't sure what to do. The smart choice was to stay back and watch. Whoever emerged victorious would be the one Peter would fight. He made a mental plan to let them wear each other out. Then, when the fight was over, he'd join in and finish them off. As the fight continued, Peter realized he didn't have much longer until he found the victor. Venom was taking them on with ease. Electro shot electricity at Venom, but the symbiote reacted by jumping up and grabbing him. Then, Electro got slammed to the ground. The 2 flying members of the 6 got slammed to the ground too. Sandman was the one Venom had difficulty with. Since he had no solid figure, Venom swiped at air and dust, but couldn't get a solid grip. The owner of Octavius Industries, Otto, threw his mechanical arms at Venom, while he was distracted by Sandman. Otto made contact with the symbiote's chest, which caused him to stumble back and fall. With Rhino out of the fight, Electro recovering, and the 2 flying members on the ground, that left 2 members of the 6 left. Even if the duo won, that meant Peter had a much easier fight on his hands. Peter latched himself to the side of the bank and became a wallflower. Goblin got up on his glider. He had pumpkin bombs ready to throw. Otto and Sandman created an opening for Goblin to slide in and weaken Venom. However, as soon as Goblin came close enough to throw the bomb, everything changed. With his tongue, Venom reached out and whacked the glider. Goblin went crashing to the floor with the activated bomb next to him. Otto knocked it away and blew a hole in the wall of the bank. Goblin hopped to his feet, but it was too late. Venom was faster. He was angrier. Venom's claws sunk into the Goblin's chest, and the man coughed out blood from the impact. Otto jumped back and prepared to strike, but Venom sensed it and grabbed one of the pumpkin bombs. He threw it at Otto, but he dodged. That meant the pumpkin bomb was coming right after Peter. Peter gasped and jumped out of the way, but it didn't matter. The explosion went off, and Peter's head hit the marble floor. As soon as he made contact with it, everything went black. When Peter snapped back to his consciousness state, he crawled away. He didn't have time to process what had happened. Instead, he had to fight the group known as the Sinister Six, was left in a frenzy because of the death of the Green Goblin. Rhino had gotten to his feet and stormed out, claiming he had wanted no part of it. Peter's spider sense was flaring up, but he was so distressed that he couldn't narrow down where the threat was coming from. The other members of the Sinister Six left the building. Otto was insisted on capturing Venom, but Electro had already darted out without saying goodbye. That meant Peter had to join the fight, but he could barely feel his body. His skin was tingling, and not in a good spider sense way. Agony shot through his veins until he grimaced and groaned from the pressure on his chest. Sandman stuck around, but Venom didn't seem interested in anyone. He had his eyes set on Peter, and that had Spider-Man hopping to his feet and getting ready to attack. Otto went to charge, but a quick swipe from Venom had Otto staggering back and almost tripping over Goblin's body. Sandman formed a storm around Venom, but the symbiote remained unaffected. "Peter Parker," Venom said, as he licked his teeth. Peter jumped up and kicked Venom in the face. He didn't so much as flinch. Instead, he grabbed Peter by the throat and pinned him to the wall. "You made me a laughingstock." Peter didn't have time to ask how Venom knew his name. He kicked and kicked, but Venom remained unaffected by Peter's relentless attacks. In the background, he saw Otto give up on the mission. He left like most of the six. And, upon seeing Otto flee, Sandman backed off, leaving Spider-Man alone with Venom. Part of him knew that they weren't backing off. Instead, they were letting Peter do the heavy lifting. Yet for some reason, Peter didn't think he could. "Who are you?" Peter shouted, as he withered in Venom's grasp. The face of the monster peeled back, and Peter's heart swelled with grief and guilt. His entire body cried out from pain. Eddie Brock's face stared back at him, and Peter almost sobbed from the sight. "We," Eddie said, his voice half demonic and half him, "are Venom." The face went back to normal, and the white eyes of Venom gazed at him. Peter shot a web and attached it to Venom's foot. He managed to pull hard enough to get Venom to stumble. That gave Peter the opening to pry himself free from Venom's grasp. He attached himself to the wall and hopped away, but he knew Venom would follow quickly, and he did. Venom sprung into action and crawled at Peter. He jumped away and panted from the actions. He realized it now. He realized why his spider sense couldn't identify what the threat was. While he was in his apartment, Venom was the symbiote, and the symbiote was once part of him. His spider sense couldn't detect where the threat was, because it couldn't tell what the symbiote was. It couldn't tell if it was a friend or a foe, and at that moment Peter couldn't either. He shot a web, but Venom blocked and retaliated by grabbing Peter's leg and forcing him down. He got slammed down, and he used his webs to slide himself away before Venom got the killing blow. "Eddie, listen to me," Peter said, but the use of his name only made Venom angrier. "Please, let's talk about this. The symbiote is making you do this. This isn't you." "Oh, but it is," Venom said with a cackle. I was doing fine until I met you. I had co-workers harassing me all day at work because of you. I almost lost my livelihood because of you. Do you have any idea of what you've done to me? My entire life revolved around my work, and now you took that from me." "I'm sorry. It was the symbiote that brought out the worst in me, just like how it's bringing out the worst in you." "We don't care," Venom replied, lunging forward and preparing to grab Peter. Peter jumped away and watched Venom slam into the wall. Spider-Man heard sirens outside, and it seemed as though the police had called backup, but he was sure that the backup would be more heavily armed this time. He was proved right when a group of men came in with shields and guns, larger than Peter's upper body. Parker got out of the way just as the men opened fire. Venom snarled and went to attack, but Peter used a web to lock the symbiote's leg in place. Venom howled in pain from the gunshots, piercing him, and he ripped the web off and charged away. He bursted through the wall and darted away, which left Peter panting. Peter slumped over and stared at Harry Osborn, his friend. Peter ran to Harry's body. Peter had a moment with Harry. Peter took Harry's hand as the Goblin looked at Peter, said a few words as he died in Peter's arms. The Sinister Six were left in disarray. But that didn't matter. Peter cried. Although Harry had been a part of Gwen's death, it was sad seeing Harry die. He was his best friend. Peter cried, knowing that he couldn't save him. And Venom was the threat. He was the threat for the Sinister Six and for Spider-Man. Both times Peter had fought him, it led to nothing. He had been saved by someone else, not himself. Peter stared into the distance as the police rushed in to investigate, but there were no words he could say. He was lost. He lost Venom. Venom was at large. And it was all Peter's fault. Peter held her hand. Through all the chaos that had happened recently, he had her. He had Mary Jane. As much as he adored her beauty, he adored the beauty inside of her heart more. The way she cared for him and stuck by him when she had no real reason to. At the end of the day, she was dating Spider-Man. She learned of his identity much sooner than anticipated, but she had no other choice, did he? Still, she didn't judge him or idolize him. She saw him the same. She treated him like a human being that deserved respect, privacy, and most importantly, love. He couldn't wait to show her to Aunt May, but maybe he was moving too fast. Revealing his identity was one thing, but showing Aunt May his new girlfriend was another. First, he had to deal with the emotional weight on his chest. It was now a good time to ask if you're feeling okay, MJ asked, wrenching him out of his thoughts. It's a good question. Problem is, I don't know if I have an answer. MJ stopped him, and they were strolling through Central Park at night. Peter had heard a rumor that there were fireworks going off tonight, in celebration of Spider-Man saving the day again, but Peter didn't know what he did. Venom was still at large. There was no point in celebrating when there was a threat running around the city. The fireworks were supposed to be red and blue to match his suit. Peter considered taking pictures to sell to the Bugle, but recently he learned to live in the moment and take care of himself. Part of that was allowing himself to put down the tech and hold MJ's hand as they walked through the park. Peter, she said, voice delicate and alluring. She drew him in, and he loved the way she managed to calm him despite all the worries stampeding in his mind. Nothing good is ever easy. You're living a hard life, but you aren't living it alone. You don't need to think that anymore, okay? You have me. You have your Aunt May you keep talking about. You're not alone. Okay, Peter changed his mind, showing May MJ sounded like a wonderful idea. So many people are relying on me. Now you are too. What if I fail like last time, he asked. He hadn't told her about Gwen yet, but he didn't know if bringing up the past was a great idea. Somehow it seemed as though MJ could read him. She placed her hand on his cheek and gave him a soft smile that filled his heart with warmth. You won't fail alone. Never again. Do you trust me? She asked. For some reason, he leaned in to touch her, and he wanted to scream yes. Despite how short a time that they had known each other, there was something in her eyes that told him that he couldn't let her go. So, he took a deep breath and returned the smile. I do. But it wasn't over yet. Despite how much he trusted her, and how he knew MJ would keep him sane, Venom was still at large. No, actually, it wasn't just Venom, it was Eddie Brock. And soon enough, he would come for revenge. And that is going to be it for If I Had Written The Amazing Spider-Man, The Sinister Six spin-off movie. Now, it was a very interesting take on a lot of these characters and villains, although I feel like it was more balanced out properly. There definitely could have been more for the villains, but I really wanted to showcase their plan and what was going to happen. There's actually a lot more questions than answered, and that's going to be revealed in, The Amazing Spider-Man 4 and The Amazing Spider-Man Maximum Carnage. We did see the emotional moment with, the Green Goblin and Peter, embracing each other one more time before Harry succumbed to Venom's injuries. And it was a very interesting twist with, Venom just, manhandling everybody. And I think that was something that I really wanted to do from the beginning, when, making this story. And that was, a concept that I took from the 1994 cartoon series. When we first see Venom, he literally picks up Rhino and throws him at the Shocker. And that was something that I wanted to do with Venom. I wanted to make him a character that was learning. You know, he's not this Venom character yet where he's going in blind and he thinks that he's on top of the world and he's gonna kill everybody. Like, this Venom is inexperienced, and I think that we can, you know, see that going forward. But what does this mean with Doc Ock, you know, Sandman, all these other characters moving forward? Well, I can tell you right now that we're gonna see more in the next, you know, If I Had Written series. We still got If I Had Written Spider-Man 5 through 10. Like, that's still 5 episodes left and movies that I haven't, you know, done yet fully. But I also do want to add in, you know, the more that I was thinking about this series, the more I want to do a Back in Black, almost, you know, Kraven the Hunter series for a future episode. And I think that's why we didn't have Kraven within this episode, was because I'm saving him later on. But that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I do want to give a big shout out to Spidey Erican. He's been doing some amazing artwork on the channel. He's been here for like years and years, and I do want to say he does have a Fiverr gig, so if you guys do want to get some artwork from him, I would highly recommend that you get it from Spidey Erican. Also, I do want to say, please do make sure to check out the Patreon. It's starting at just $1 a month, but if you guys do check out the Patreon, it actually helps me, you know, pay and, you know, cover costs on the channel. And if I want to order from Spidey Erican, you know, it definitely helps me a lot more with, like, the artwork on the channel. And I think that's just, you know, the standard on the channel is that I really want to be professional with these videos. And I have seen a lot of comments with people are like blown away, and I can't thank you enough. You know, there's a lot of high standards on this channel, and I don't think I've ever discussed that, but I really do try to go above and beyond with each storyline. And sometimes, you know, sometimes I might fail to do that, but I really do feel like, you know, this is my passion. Like the What If series and the If I Had Written series, I feel like right now has been the best it's ever been with quality-wise. So I do want to say, if you guys have any suggestions for, you know, quality, what I can do better, what I'm doing wrong, you know, I'd highly recommend that you showcase that in the comments. But again, thank you so much for tuning in. Subscribe, like, share, and turn those notifications on so you and your friends are up to date with the latest content. But I'll see you in the next video. Take care, my fellow watchers, and have a great day. Peace out.